Have you heard the story about the man who slipped and fell while he was trying to clean the limbs from his roof? He slid down the steep shingles, slipped over the eave, barely managed to grab hold of the gutters. Dangling there 3 stories from the earth, the man looked to the heavens above and shouted, "My God, can anyone help me?" Suddenly, time stopped. The clouds parted, and a voice from heaven said, "Have faith, turn loose." The man took one more glance at the ground below, looked back up to the heavens and said, "Is there anybody else up there who can help me?" Today our New Testament reading is from the chapter 11 of the book of Hebrews. Hebrews is really more like a sermon than a letter. Basically, it addresses believers who face persecution and urges them to keep the faith, arguing that through Christ, the faithful have direct access to God. Chapter 11 gives several examples of persons of faith from Israel's past and connects their experience with present and the future. The author of Hebrews takes the head-on challenge of attempting to describe faith by saying, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Or faith is a commitment to a reality we can't prove, but we know by experience. By faith, we can come to know that the universe was created as an expression of God's word or God's purpose. Others have said that faith is the ability to look up, let go, and take a leap. Let's look at those 3 ideas for a moment. First, look up. The author of Hebrews talks about Abraham and his looking up to God for guidance. Abraham is a model of giving control to God, or looking up, even when it didn't make sense and when he had no idea what was going to happen. Abraham is told by God to take his family and his flocks and move to a land that God would provide. He had no idea where he was going or what he would find when he got there. He was leaving all that was familiar, as well as considerable wealth and standing in his community. But in faith, Abraham gave God control, or looked up, and he ended up in the land he had been promised. Even though his wife Sarah was barren and both parents were in their 80s or 90s, Abraham ends up with a child to inherit, thus completing God's promise. Living by faith involves looking up. There's an interesting story about John G. Patton, who was a pioneer missionary to the New Hebrides. It relates the idea of looking up or giving God control. Dr. Patton was attempting to translate the Bible into a native language. He soon discovered that while the natives had words for house and tree and stone and the like, they had no words for love or joy or peace. Worst of all, they had no word for belief or faith. One day, as he sat in his hut filled with frustration, an old native entered, slumped down in the chair. Exhausted from the long journey, the man said, "I'm leaning my whole weight on the chair." "What did you say?" asked Dr. Patton. The man replied, "I'm leaning my whole weight on the chair." Immediately, Dr. Patton cried, "That's it!" And from that day forward, for that tribe, faith in Jesus became lean your whole weight on Jesus. So the first part of living by faith involves looking up, or leaning our whole weight on Jesus. The second clue to living by faith is letting go. After consulting with God, it's time to let go and let God be God. Jesus assures us over and over again in the Gospels that if we let go, it allows us to live by faith and that God will provide. Not necessarily what we want, but always what we need. In today's Gospel, Jesus is addressing his disciples and tells his disciples, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." Elsewhere in the Gospels, Jesus tells his disciples, "Consider the lilies of the field and how they grow. And if the Father provides for them, how much more will he provide for us?" I know I have trouble and have met many people who also struggle with letting go. Letting go is very easy to say and very hard to do. Yet, just like Abraham and Sarah had to look up and let go or give control to God, faith requires that we do the same thing. Rather trivial and yet amusing example of literally letting go happened to me almost 3 years ago on a trip to the Big Sky area of Montana. My sister, daughter, and I rented a timeshare right by a lake about 7,500 feet. My sister really wanted to go ziplining. To say I was reluctant is an understatement. I didn't want to let her go alone, and I didn't want let my fear win. It was also an excellent prayer experience, by the way. So my sister and I signed up to zipline. We were about 30 years older than the rest of the group. The beginning part of that 2-hour trip involved hiking about a quarter of a mile straight up a mountain, as the start of the course is at 8,500 feet. I survived that. I also paid very close attention as to how to rig the harness and other equipment. Each of us was checked at least 3 times before we took off from the platform. I was purposely the last of the 12 people to zip because I figured I couldn't chicken out at that point. It took a lot of courage to take those steps up the platform and then jump off. A literal letting go, which leads us to the third area of faith. For after looking up and letting go, faith involves taking a step. Both looking up and letting go can be processes that don't involve much obvious change, yet without them, we can't take that step of faith. For it is in taking the step of faith that we begin to live out, in the words of today's gospel, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. When we prayerfully talk to God, let go of what might hinder us in following what we hear, then we take a step of faith. Without that final step, we can get stuck in looking up or letting go, and change and transition get blocked. For example, if Abraham had talked and talked about what he heard from God, but never followed through, we wouldn't have had much of the first chapter of Genesis, and Abraham would not be considered the father of our faith. Taking a step of faith is the third leg of the stool of faith, for it completes looking up and letting go. Phillips Brooks, who is a famous 19th century Episcopal preacher in Boston, penned an acrostic from the words of the letters of faith. Brooks took F-A-I-T-H and said, faith stands for forsaking all, I take him. He goes on to say, many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand, but forsaking all, I take him. Many things that happen today are more than I can comprehend, but forsaking all, I take him. Many things about yesterday continue to drag me down, but forsaking all, I take him. When living by faith, I feel no alarm. Forsaking all, I take him. Faith, says the author of Hebrews, is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So look up, let go, take a leap of faith, forsake all, and take him. In the name of the Father, the Son,